All right, Josh, let's move into Clemson and Duke territory. We promised Clemson fans that the reason we didn't give them a preview this summer, because we have a lot of faithful followers that were asking for it, was that we were going to do this game in week one. So we're going to have a little conversation about Clemson versus Duke. And we want to remind y'all that we have launched something huge this week, and we're going to plug it for a while. collegefootballnerds.com, our website, really new to the world. It's a great home for stats, for college stats, rankings, player rankings, team rankings, all that stuff. But you have a member dashboard when you sign up, and you can get on our Pick'em $500 prize, the best Pick'em in September. It's a Pick'em we're going to run all season and do monthly prizes. And then that Pick'em is going to inform or give you an opportunity to fill out a top 25. That's right. We're releasing first ever Nerd Nation Top 25 starting in week 4 of the season. We're not going to start with preseason junk. We're going to wait till we get some data, week 4. But we're also turning on in week 4 our model. That's right, the model that's driven this show for years. We're going to turn it over to you and let you pick any 2 teams, and it's going to spit out the same thing that it would spit out if we were doing a preview. We are opening that up to everyone. Go check it out, collegefootballnerds.com. One more quick plug. Feature I'm mostly proud of because I chase box scores on Sundays for my favorite college team, players on everywhere in the NFL. You can go to NFL tab, search your team, and boom, it spits out all the players for whatever team you're looking for in the NFL week by week or overall for the season. That way you don't have to hunt and chase box scores on ESPN.com. All right, Josh. Clemson, Duke. A lot of people looked at me sideways when I said Duke is going to be good this year, and Duke is going to give Clemson maybe not necessarily a scare. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's a respectable opponent. And I don't know that everybody realizes how good Duke was last year, how good they can be this year. And this isn't just some gimme tune-up game for Clemson to start the season.
Yeah, Duke was a good football team. They went 9-4 last year, 5-3 in ACC play. The games they did lose were not by much. They lost by 3 to North Carolina. They lost by 2 to Pittsburgh, and they lost by 1 touchdown to Kansas. And that Kansas team, as it turned out, was really good. It's kind of funny that early on when Kansas beat Duke, and that was a close game, it didn't seem like it was a big deal, but later on in the year when Kansas was viewed to be a better football team, especially at midseason before they had QB issues and whatnot, then we started to look at that Duke game askance. But I don't think people really ever gave credit to the fact that Duke really was, really, I think legitimately a touchdown worse than Kansas when Kansas was playing good football. And so there's a reason why this game is interesting. And the point spread does favor Clemson, favors it, I think. I've looked from opening line to current line, seems to be around 11 points now. That's a sizable spread, but it's still not that large. This is a game that Duke is expected to be competitive in, expected to have a chance to win the football game. And when you look down the rosters, there's good reason for it. I think somewhere around 8 returning starters on offense, somewhere around 8 returning starters on defense for Duke. At the quarterback position, Riley Leonard was probably one of the better quarterbacks in the country last year. Really easily one of the better quarterbacks in the country last year. And probably one of the best returning starters in the country this year. Elko, I think, did a tremendous job last season, and now it's going to be another year with him to be able to really get that team turned into what he wants them to be. So there's every reason really to think that Duke is going to be an improved football team from last year. And I think Clemson fans, a lot of them that follow the ACC are aware of it. But because Duke didn't play Clemson last season, there are probably a lot of Clemson fans that don't really realize how good they were, in all honesty. It's just a good football team, and it's a team that I think will also give a very good Clemson team a run for their money. Because I think, and I know you think, Clemson is a football team that has a chance to kind of right some wrongs and turn back into the kind of football team they expect to be.
Yeah, I think that, to me, what's really interesting about this number is that I think Vegas, it says more about Duke than it does about Clemson, because some of what's kind of expected from Clemson is already baked in. Like, their biggest issue for the last couple of years is Dabo playing knucklehead games with, being just very charitable about who he let run his offense. And now he's got someone in there to run the show that put up major numbers last year at a team that actually had talent disadvantages. So I think that, there is still questions at quarterback, and we'll get into that in a second. But I think that if you're looking at it just from year to year, the biggest pain point that has plagued Clemson for a couple of years now is probably gone. At worst, it's better, but at best, it's, what we saw last year offensively at TCU. So one note on Elko, because I'm glad you brought him up. Like, I've been an Elko fan for years, especially, what he could do to teams defensively. 2021, Duke was 127th in scoring defense. 2022, they were 31st. You don't see that kind of jump ever, Josh.
Yeah. I don't know what USC paid for Lincoln Riley, but they probably should have paid at least half that to try to get Elko too, because they sure as heck could use that kind of jump, or could have used it at Oklahoma or at USC now. It is rare, right? It's rare to see someone turn a defense around to that degree. And the fact that all those guys come back makes you think that they're going to be that much better, because continuity on defense is usually the driving force into defense being good. And that's something I think Clemson's understood as well, right? Defensive continuity from the coaching staff and the players year after year has been what makes them a great team. This is another team that has a lot of returning starters, probably around 8 returning starters defensively. Yes, they lose a couple big pieces, and when I say big, I mean that literally. I think Brazee and Murphy have been two of easily the best players in college football the last few years. I think those guys were honestly really underrated on a national level, and I think they would have gone a lot higher in the NFL draft than they even did if it wasn't for the injury concerns. Healthy, those guys, in my view, were top 5 picks. They were that good. And so defensively, it's going to be interesting to see, because there's a lot of really good pieces there, right? You got guys like Xavier Thomas or Nate Wiggins that are great players, or players with extremely high levels of talent. They can still probably be the best defense in the ACC, but it's been the ability of the front seven to dominate that's really established Clemson. It's just surprising, I think, to see that Duke is playing at such a high level defensively without that level of talent, because the gap there is pretty extreme between the two teams. And if they can continue to improve upon it, then this game gets a lot more interesting, because now you've got two really, really good defenses, and it's really good defenses that keep scores lower, and lower scores in a football game are what make games exciting. Exciting for third-party fans, less exciting if you're a fan of a team that loses. But they're what makes upsets, and it's what makes games tend to be volatile and unpredictable, which is, to some degree, just kind of fun football for everybody, right?
Yeah, and the defenses are probably where I get into, thinking about how I would pick this game. I know that everybody's high on Leonard, and my concern with him is last year, and I'm sorry, I got to look it up pretty quick, but
see if I can beat you to it, Daniel. Riley Leonard was 63.8% passing, 7.6 yards per, 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions.
What was that, YPA? 7.6. That's the number that concerns me. 20 to 6 INT ratio, that's okay. It's not great. 60% I like. 7.6 yards per attempt, and people are going to get tired of me saying this, but I put a stat out, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and it showed that, there were only, 3 NFL quarterbacks. I don't know the exact number, but there were, 3 NFL quarterbacks that didn't average at least 8 or 8.5 yards per attempt in college. It is a good indicator of whether or not you're elite. Now, people are going to say the talent around him and Allen at Wyoming had a low IPA. Yes, there are instances, including one that Duke fans can appreciate. Daniel Jones, I think, was one of those guys who I was high on coming out of college, and he didn't have a really high YPA. My concern is that maybe some of their winning hid a little bit of what's not quite elite quarterback play, which is probably what you're going to need to beat Clemson. Now, on the flip side, last year we saw Clemson's defense give up a lot of points. Wake Forest and Notre Dame, there were games where they weren't normal Clemson games. And I know I said offense has been the place that's really plagued them, but defensively, even in wins, they weren't great. So if we're thinking about this game, is it a situation where Clemson might win this game, but we still don't know if we know enough about them to start making predictions on
I
whether
think that's
or not?
probably fair. I mean, this Duke defense is sound, but they're still not elite. And the other thing stylistically is Duke. The reason why Leonard is so highly thought of is a runner, right? Duke is a run first team right now with this offense and sort of what they bring to the table as an all around unit. And there aren't many teams that beat Clemson with a quarterback leading the team in rushing, because that front seven is so good. They are generally able to take away the run game from their opponents. And let's say my ability to pull up statistics on the fly. If you look at Clemson's rush defense last year on a game-by-game basis, there are not many games where teams had any success on the ground. They averaged 3.25 yards per carry. We usually say somewhere over 4 is competent. And if you want to count the number of games where a team had a competent day running the ball, I got 4 in the whole year. Florida State and Notre Dame both ran the ball for over 5.5 yards a carry or over 5 yards a carry. Really, the only two teams to have a good day rushing were Florida State and Notre Dame. Syracuse and Louisville also ran for over 4, and it was right there in a block, where they had a lot of stuff going on. They kind of struggled a little bit for the run there. Outside that, nobody had 4 yards a carry. Tennessee, in putting up 31 points, ran for 3.26 yards per carry. Even South Carolina in that loss, South Carolina had 55 yards on the ground. So the problem for Duke, I think, is that this isn't a great matchup. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and lead into my pick. Does that work for you?
I want you to give one more insight, because this is actually one of your better talking points, even though I've heard it a billion times. You have a whole thought about yards per carry
rushing
and overusing the quarterback. I'm looking at these rushing statistics and seeing, I didn't actually realize, I knew Riley Leonard ran, I didn't know he ran this much. He had 124 carries last year. Their next highest rusher as a running back actually only had 123 carries last year. That probably flies all over you a little bit.
Well, it does and it doesn't. So I'll be honest here. My axiom is that a running quarterback should not get carries when there is a running back with a higher yard per carry average. And what I mean by that is that every time you run the ball, you are basically choosing who gets it and who doesn't. And so if a quarterback's running the ball, the running back is not running the ball. And there are a handful of teams that have existed out there where the quarterback is getting a lot of carries, leading the team in rushing, and the running backs are kind of getting starved. The big example to me of that was 2018 Alabama. That's where really this got founded in my head when they were on that national championship game run before Clemson derailed them quite hard. And the problem was that, it wasn't 2018. I guess it was 2016. So I got to back up there. So I got the wrong Jalen Hurts year in my head. So it wasn't the other one. It was the other time.
Still Clemson.
The other time that Clemson derailed them. I just had the wrong year because Clemson managed to do that multiple times. But that year with Jalen Hurts, he ran the ball so much that he actually led Alabama in rushing, but their backs averaged 2 or 3 yards per carry more. So I think Damian Harris averaged over 7 yards per carry for Alabama that year, and Jalen Hurts was averaging like 4.5. At some point, they needed to run Hurts less and give Harris more carries. And at some point, people are going to queue on the running back. His totals would have gone down. But what would have happened is his rushing average would have gone down a little bit. Hurts's would have gone up, and the team average would have been better. Leonard doesn't have that problem, though. I mean, he led the team in carries, but he had 5.6 yards per carry. Jordan Waters, the second leading rusher, had 4.6. So I don't really have an issue with balance here. I just think it's more an indication of the fact that as an overall rushing team, they weren't that dominant. The second and third leading guys in carries were backs at 4.6 and 4.7 yards per carry. That really goes to the fact that Riley Leonard was carrying that team a little bit by his ability to run the ball on the ground and his ability to throw it. To the extent that his statistics were good enough in that way, And I don't mean like that he wasn't a good passer, just to the extent that the passing game was effective enough to carry the team. And that's why I think this is a tough matchup. It's why I'm going to pick Clemson in this one. I'm going to pick Clemson 27-20 for the sake of it. I don't really know exactly how to handicap this, given that it's week 1. I don't know how high scoring it's going to be because I really don't know what to think of Clemson's offense. I need to see a game with Klubnik. We've kind of glossed over it, but Klubnik's another guy that was around a 7.5 yard per attempt passer, maybe worse than that, right? There are reasons to think that Clemson isn't going to roll out there, and he was 7 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And even though he was a freshman, I don't know that I buy that he's going to be a 10-yard per attempt guy. Even with a different offensive coordinator, I expect them to be a little bit slow out of the gate. I don't expect a massive turnaround. I expect an effective offense, not a dominant one. I think an 11-point spread is about right. I think they're probably going to score high 20s to low 30s. I've got them pegged to win but fail to cover. It won't shock me if they cover by a small margin, but I think that's the kind of game that this is.
So I have been a Garrett Riley fanboy for a little bit now, and I have been very vocal about the fact that the one thing that was holding Clemson back was, I think even everybody's going to say DJU wasn't great, but I think a lot of that was offensively, schematically, they weren't taking advantage of the things that he could do well. And then he'd flash, and then he'd go away. And for me, I think they've got a missing piece that they've missed for a while. And Clemson, it's going to be Clemson Florida State show this year, in my opinion, in the ACC. I've got Clemson covering this game 34-20. I still don't have it just like a runaway, and it wouldn't surprise me if Duke kept this game close. It would surprise me if they won, even though I don't think it's out of the question. It would surprise me, and I think it would say more if Duke wins this. I'd have more concerns really about Clemson at quarterback, because to me that would signal that Klubnik is not the guy. Any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, you said it would concern him at quarterback, but I think the ultimate point here is you're just going to have to see how they look, because it's week 1. We don't know who these teams are. One team's going to improve and another one's not, and it won't shock me if one or the other of these teams takes a big step forward and surprises us in this football game. But that's the trouble of trying to pick week 1. Everybody thinks they're great. Every fall camp report says they're the best team ever. So you always just kind of have to wait and see.
I do like, Josh, doing week 1 previews for games a little better than preseason team previews, because you missed that third string offensive tackle on the depth chart and make him second string, and people are going to get up in you. So I kind of like talking about the teams a little bit more, but I really like it next week after I have some information to go on.